I am so very honored to be starting my first ever Aspen Ideas Fest with two men whom I greatly, greatly admire. Both of these men use their talents for good, which I know we need more of in this world. So let me introduce our panelists who both wrote books that we chose for our Today Show Read with Jenna book club. They are two of my favorite authors. I see y'all are still coming in a little late to class. Come have a seat, no worries. But as I said, these men exemplify using the written word to make change, and they also are beautiful, beautiful writers. So let me introduce you to Javier Zamora, who I see that he already has fans, including his beautiful wife, who is here. Javier's first poetry collection is titled Unaccompanied, and his debut New York Times best-selling memoir, Solito, tells his gripping experience as a young migrant from El Salvador. I'm thrilled to say it just hit the New York Times bestsellers list again.
Paperback.
And yes, it's out in paperback.
Yep.
And let me introduce you to Jamie Ford. Jamie is a self-taught writer. His work includes the latest book, The Many Daughters of Aang Moy, Love and Other Consolation Prizes, Songs of Willow Frost, and Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet, which may just be the best titled book ever. It also spent 2 years on the New York Times bestseller list. Let me start with Javier. As I mentioned, you write your harrowing and heartbreaking journey as a 9-year-old little boy, all by himself, migrating from El Salvador to the United States in Solito. For those that haven't read it, talk a little bit about your journey.
First off, thank you, everybody, for being here. Let's see. I was born in 1990. And in El Salvador, we had a war from 1980 till 1992. And so when I was 1 year old, my dad left. And when I was 5, in 1995, my mom left. So I was left at the care of my grandparents. And by 1997, when my parents, whenever we would talk on the phone, they would say that they would come back and be with me. By 1997, that changed, but me having to come to the United States and be with them. And they tried multiple ways to get me here, and eventually the best choice was using the same coyote that brought my mom over in 1995. And so the book begins on April 6, 1999, when I'm with this coyote and my grandpa accompanies me all the way up to Guatemala. And in Guatemala, it's 2 weeks, because the coyote promised my family that the whole trip was going to take 2 weeks, and we're 2 weeks in, and we're still in Guatemala. My grandpa had to go back, and then I'm with 6 other immigrants, who I call the Six, and then we all have to figure a way to make it to the United States, and that's pretty much it.
You were 8 and 9 years old. You were a little boy, and I think to live it must have been horrible, but to relive it, to recount these details, to write this memoir, I know took a lot.
Yeah, the title of the book is Solito, and in a lot of ways, I felt alone, when my parents left, but I wasn't really, because I was with my grandparents. And then during the trip, I felt alone because I was with strangers. But then if you read the book, these strangers become like my second family. So I wasn't really alone. The hardest thing, I think, for me, was living with the trauma of those 9 weeks. And that, I truly felt alone living it for 20 years. Because I come here in 1999, I'm 9 years old, and I don't write this book until I'm 29. And a lot of different things had to occur. One of them being getting a green card when I'm 28 years old, meeting my wife being another, and having a wonderful therapist who has helped me unpack a lot of this trauma that I couldn't have done alone.
Jamie, your newest book, one that I love, both of these books were, and I'm not just saying this because they're sitting here with me, but my favorite nonfiction of last year and my favorite historical fiction of last year. You wrote The Many Daughters of Aang Moy. Aang was the first known Chinese-American immigrant to come here.
Chinese woman.
Chinese woman. Yeah, I guess she didn't really become an American, did she?
No, no.
So talk to me about her story and why you decided to write about her.
Yeah, Aang Moy came to this country in 1834, first Chinese woman to come to America. For a hot minute, she was the most famous woman in America. She'd written about in 200 newspapers. She performed in theaters where she sang in Chinese. She demonstrated chopsticks. But she had bound feet, so that was really the sideshow attraction quality to her life here. And in all of this sensational news about her, we never hear from her. We only hear from the people who have monetized her. And then, not that long, a few years later, she disappears from headlines. And the last anyone hears about Aang is someone sees her living in a poorhouse in New Jersey. She's never heard from again. And I was always fascinated with this woman's journey, especially because there's all this excitement about her, and people looked at her like this intrepid world traveler. They looked at her like this cultural ambassador, but Chinese women couldn't leave China. The punishment was death if they returned. So in all likelihood, she was sold into this life. And I wanted to give her a voice. I looked at how my grandmother, my great-grandmother, how they were received in this country. And Aang Moy really set this exotic standard that was imprinted by other people on Asian women really to this day. And it's a stereotype that Aang didn't create, but she was forced to perpetuate. And now we're all trying to move out from under that shadow.
You write her story, but also the daughters that
yeah.
you imagine, the daughters that come after her. And it really is this beautiful story of what we carry.
Yeah.
The trauma, the intergenerational trauma, the intergenerational love.
Yeah.
And I know that you were really inspired by studies that you had read. So talk a little bit about all of that.
Yeah. Me and Javier, we're going to talk. We're going to share therapist stories and trauma stories. There's a screenwriters strike, and I saw one sign, and it said, AI doesn't have a traumatic childhood. And, it's true. But the book is about intergenerational trauma. It's about epigenetics, inherited trauma. What is epigenetics? When we think of genetic inheritance, we think of hair color, eye color, that kind of stuff. Epigenetics is the concept that we inherit psychological traits, resiliency, phobias, emotional IQ, and in many ways, our ability or inability to love and care for other people. We are encumbered with the trauma of our forebears. This is something that's been, it's entering the cultural zeitgeist from a bunch of different areas, but for me personally, when I was writing this book, the only person that knew what I was talking about was my therapist. And in therapeutic world, there's a lot of therapeutic modalities to address this, but now it's becoming more known, understood, accepted, and people are having to reckon with this. And so what I did was I gave Aang Moy a fictional matrilineal line, and I show how that trauma is expressed in all these different generations, and also how Chinese women are received at different points in time. And the book actually goes to about 2045. So I've given us a little bit of a hopeful future, as opposed to the AI tent where I'm now going to dig a doom bunker in my backyard.
Yeah, and there is that hope. I mean, I think, when we hear the words trauma, it sometimes scares us. I know that on our show, when we talk about things that are sad, sometimes people tune out. And I know that in a world that's filled with hurt and pain, the opposite of that is joy and love. And we meet her great, I can't do the math, but you can, granddaughter, Dorothea, who has decided to do what?
Yeah, she's Seattle's poet laureate in the novel. She's struggling with a lot of mental health issues that I struggle with, that many of us struggle with. And she notices her daughter exhibiting the exact same behavior and actually remembering things she shouldn't remember. And so she goes through a therapeutic modality to re-remember the past. And even there's a concept, it's not a concept, but a field of quantum biology. It gets a little esoteric, but the idea that if we re-remember the past, we're actually changing the past. A little thought experiment.
Javier, what you did in Solito is a masterpiece because you humanized, you told your story, and not to put this on your shoulders, but I'm sure you've heard because I got to see the lines of people that got to come and meet you and see you. You humanize the story of so many others. We can turn on our TV and see what's happening at the border, but you told your story. What would you like us to know about how we can do better by our kids, by kids like you? I know that's a big question.
Well, to follow up on your point, I don't know where I read, but what's it?
Epigenetics.
Epigenetics really unpacked a lot of things for me because I was carrying this trauma, but also, and this is going to your point, growing up undocumented, which I have been up until I was 21 in this country, was very difficult. And it seemed to me that the news cycle and politicians didn't really know how to speak about us. I remember in 2006, I don't know if you remember, there was this huge march of like the Day Without Immigrants. And up until that point, that was the biggest demonstrations since the Civil Rights Movement. And it was all immigrants, like millions of people. And that seemed to do something with the American psyche. And then it was quiet. And it was 2010 when Americans learned the word undocumented. Everybody was using the I word, which you shouldn't use. And then in 2014, 2016, it was like the crisis of the kids at the border. And as a kid, an immigrant kid myself, it felt like I had been erased up until that point. And that really messed with my head. I was frustrated because finally people were finding out about kids like me, but at the same time, we were reduced and flattened to just our trauma. And every time, to this day, when people talk about immigrants, you show a video or you show a picture and you talk about us in numbers and you show us during our worst moments of our lives. And so with Solito, I wanted to do the complete opposite. I wanted to like pump life into those flattened voices and really show that we are complete human beings and that we are more than the 9 weeks that it takes to get here, or like the brief moment of like jumping over a fence, or the day that it takes to cross the Sonoran Desert. You know, we are more than that.
Oh, we should clap. And then I lost my cards. And that's exactly, if you haven't read Solito, what you did. Thank you, Javier, so beautifully. Jamie, your grandfather came here. Some of you may think Jamie Ford doesn't sound like a Chinese name. He actually changed his name.
He did.
Talk about his life and what you carry.
Yeah, his name was Min Chung, and he came here and he changed his name to William Ford, as people sometimes do to try and assimilate. And he worked in Nevada. He was a pioneer. He was a miner, and he raised a family in Tonopah. I went to find his grave last year. I went to Tonopah, and there's a pioneer cemetery where all these famous pioneers are buried, and it's a tourist attraction. And then just off-site was the Chinese cemetery, so I wanted to go there. And when I got there, it's buried under 30 feet of mining waste. And so his legacy is literally buried. And so I carry his story. It's the things that, those traumas, I think at some point, you can turn your pain into your superpower and unleash it on the page and create an empathy enlarging experience for the reader. And I think that's, in one small way, helping to move us away from the darkness, if you will.
And your grandmother's story
is
also...
Yeah, my yin-yin, my grandmother. She was about 18 years old, so this is the mid-20s, 1924, 25. She wanted to go on a train trip from Seattle to San Francisco, and she wrote to the U.S. Immigration Department to get special permission to cross state lines. I have this document. I have the copy of it from the archives at Angel Island. And she was afraid that she was going to be stopped, arrested, and deported, even though she was born here. And what happened was there was the Mann Act was passed in 1910, which was designed to prevent women from being trafficked across borders, but it was applied mainly to women of color. If they presumed them to be a prostitute, even if they're married, they could arrest both of those people. And so that was the reality of my grandmother's life. This isn't pre-Civil War times. This is not that long ago. And so our society still has these echoes that we're hearing, and the next generation is hearing. And some people, they're sympathetic, and other people, they have harder hearts, and they turn a deaf ear.
Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes we forget the power of literature to change minds, to open hearts.
Yeah.
Javier, when you got to go on book tour across this country, what did you find? I know many people saw themselves in your story.
I like to say that Salvadorans have made it in a lot of ways because we have pupusas in Whole Foods. We had an astronaut stuck in space who's also Salvadoran. And I guess I needed to see it, that we are everywhere. And I remember being, I think, in Indiana or Ohio, like in a place where I'd never heard of Salvadorans being. But they were there. And it was in one of those places where it has happened multiple times. Not once, not 5, I want to say 8 individuals whom I've met who crossed the border from El Salvador in 1999, in May or June. And 3 of those were 9 years old. So, and what they told me was that they felt alone. They felt like nobody else had gone through what they had gone through, which is what trauma does to you. That's exactly what I felt. And because I felt that way, I wasn't the kindest person to be around because I didn't have a therapist yet.
And there was shame,
and
right?
There's a lot of shame, and but also having individuals or the book that I wrote and being like all of you, like if there's another immigrant in the crowd, like seeing me up here on stage does a lot to you and to me, because finally we're getting the media coverage on our own terms. It's not this flattening thing that I just talked about. And time again, people thank me for doing that work, which I never thought that this was gonna happen, and like living my best dream, and you had a huge part in doing that, so thank you. But yeah, it's been a wild ride.
One of the things that I loved about both of your books is you write a lot about the American dream. Javier, let's start with you. I know on your journey, you expected things from Los Estados Unidos that didn't really exist. So talk about expectations versus reality.
I just love how you pronounce it. You try to pronounce solito in Los Estados Unidos.
I tried.
It's so endearing. And everybody should try. Yeah, it's really good. Everybody should try.
Try. I like the word try.
Well, as a 9-year-old, I was expecting Baywatch. I was expecting Full House, 90210. That's the idea of the United States that I had. And that's what I wholeheartedly believed I was signing up for. And there's this idea, and then there's the reality. And those two things didn't match up for me for a long time. And they didn't match up for me, even though as an undocumented person, I graduated from the, at the time, #1 public university in the world, which is UC Berkeley. And then I go to the most expensive university in the world, NYU, at that time. And then I go to Stanford, 1 or #2. And then I go to Harvard, 1 or #2. And like, I still don't have a green card. I finally get it when I'm at Harvard. And it's like this idea of checking the boxes of what it means to be a good immigrant or to be living an idea of a dream. And still, I felt so empty. And I felt so empty because I hadn't processed all those things that I stacked on top of one another over the 20 years. And at the bottom line were these 9 weeks. And so I think this is the very first step of unpacking and learning about myself. And literature helped me literally put myself in my own shoes, which I hadn't done and I wasn't ready to do. And once I did it, I feel better. And I think finally, I'm getting to enjoy truly what this country has done for me, which I am also very aware, had I stayed in El Salvador, I couldn't be who I am. And that is the 100% reality, that's why people are fleeing and still coming to this country. Because in one generation, you know, I grew up without running water in dirt floors. In one generation, that kid could go to Harvard and like be in Aspen talking to you guys, which is wild. It's wild to me. And I'm living it.
Yeah. Jamie, I know that you've learned a lot about identity and what it means, the American dream from your family, but also I'm sure you have via studying Afang.
Yeah.
It isn't as simple as I think sometimes we think.
I think people can come to this country who are not born here, become citizens, contribute magnificently to our country, and still be seen as, in many ways, a lesser. Or maybe they still feel that, and because we're not represented in the foundational idea of this country. The signatories of the, our founding documents, they were all white men, and that's the archetype of what a true American is. And everything else, that's our measuring stick. This is the Aspen Ideas Festival. I do think it would be useful if, this is a crazy idea, bear with me. Somewhere between status quo and crazy idea is this beautiful space to improve the world. I think we should add, maybe every 20 years, add new co-signers to our Constitution. Provocative idea, okay? We don't change it. We don't sign the actual document, create a facsimile, have a ceremony at the White House. And the people that are nominated are, there's a Filipino-American poet, and there's this line from this poem that says, "I'm humbled in the presence of the veterans, not the ones who picked up their guns, but those who picked up their brethren." Find the people who are uplifting our society, moving us forward as a culture, and have them become a codified caretaker of the American dream. And the argument is, well, they didn't write it. Well, guess what? Neither did the Founding Fathers. James Madison wrote it. The other 38 guys that signed that did not write that. Like, well, I mean, picture someone like Maria Reza. Have her sign that, right? Nobel Prize winner. She's fighting for democracy the world over. And people will say, well, she wasn't born here. Well, guess what? 20% of the signatories weren't born here. So I just think there's things we can do where we expand this canvas of what it is to be an American. And then we aren't seen as the token success. We are the accepted norm. And I think something like that is I would advocate for that, clearly.
As you can tell, Jamie is an incredible thinker, and he says this about his writing, which now that I've had the chance to read a few of his books and gotten to be on Zooms with him and get to know him as a human, I know it to be true. He says, you say, I'll speak of it, that you are in the compassion, creation business.
Yeah, I think Javier would agree.
Yeah.
We're in the compassion creation business, brother, you know? I mean, someone can write books about car crashes and asteroid collisions, but I want to write empathy enlarging experiences. And there's a deficit in our culture right now. And I think it's, sometimes it's like, throwing a stone into the ocean and you think it doesn't matter, but it matters to me. It matters like I'm spending my life in a way that seems worthy, and is an example for my children, and in a way that, I feel the same way you are. I am standing on the sunburned, broken shoulders of my grandfather. I am his greatest dream come true, and I need to do something with that.
Okay, now I'm crying. It's just so beautiful. I think one of the things that has been such a gift to me is that our mission with Read with Jenna right away has been to highlight debut and diverse authors. Authors who historically haven't always been heard, whose marketing money isn't going at them like crazy. And somebody once said, well, who's your favorite? Like, which author has you connected with the most? And I'm not kidding, every single one has been a beautiful gift to me, to our audience, to our book club members, because I think what I'm interested in is our books about compassion, about empathy. And we know that reading a story like Javier's or reading about Aang can open people's minds and can start conversation, which then can change people. So it's like, it's so weird, but I'm like, every single one has been an incredible gift. And now I know you can see why. Javier, you talked a little bit about this at the beginning, but I love how you say you wanted to create this three-dimensional, you just wrote your story, but what you did in Solito is also talked about the joy, about the humanity that you experienced during this really tricky time. And you dedicate your book to a group of people, one of whom carried you, literally put you on their back when your little 9-year-old feet could not walk anymore. Talk about your found family and why you dedicate the book to them.
In the book, I call them the Four, and their names are Chino, which, Latinos were racist as well. I must say that. And her name is Patricia, which I did not make this up, is also my mom's name. There's this woman who had my mom's name right there, who also took care of me, and her daughter, Carla, who is 3 years older than me. She must have been 12. And, I had a book of poems that came out in 2017. And in that book of poems, I only talk about Chino once in the 88 pages. And how I talk about him, I describe him getting beat up by Border Patrol agents. And here I was critiquing the system or immigration politics, but then I had also internalized that, and the way that I chose to portray this human being was the exact same thing that I was critiquing, what I was watching in the news. Does that make sense? And that ate away at me. And I think prose became the mechanism. I had never written prose before, in which you could really not only highlight the trauma, but you could think of different scenes and put these people in joyous moments. Like, I remember having fart wars with Patricia, which is like a bonding moment in the weirdest way possible. Like eating really, it was perhaps not the best fish ever, but to us, because we were so hungry, eating fried fish in Acapulco. And just like moments like that I couldn't do in poetry and that I hadn't allowed myself to get to, but that actually did happen, and that these people deserve to be portrayed in those ways as well.
You dedicate the book to them, and I know one of your hopes by publishing it and getting to travel around would be that maybe they would reach out to you.
Yeah, it hasn't happened, and it's the most asked questions. Every day I get DMs. Have you found a fool? Have you found him? And
I know, I didn't even really want to ask it.
And I've also gotten offers of headhunters who like, I would do pro bono work and find them for you. And I don't think I would want that. I think it's on their own terms. You know, everybody who has gone through any sort of trauma has their own path, and you can't force somebody to look in the mirror. And for myself, you know, it took so many years for me to be able to even remember the 9 weeks and talk about it. And for a lot of immigrants, even my parents still haven't told me their own stories because it's super difficult to just tell even like a family member. So I don't know. I think once they're ready, I don't even know if they're alive, but if they're alive, I think it's gonna take them being ready to face what I described for them reaching out.
One of the things that was so cool about getting to speak with Javier before he published this book was that I got to see his journal entries from when he first came to this country. And I think people might think, how could you write this memoir years later? But you did a lot to get there, including, you know, therapy and looking back at those journals.
California wasn't a liberal haven, you know, how we think of it now. In 1998, they had a very anti-immigrant bill. And I just so happened to come here in 1999. And the backlash was actually quite good because in Marin County, which at the time was the 4th richest county in the world, in Marin, they had this program for unaccompanied children who were in the school systems. And they signed me up with a therapist that I had to meet with once a week for 10 weeks. And over these 10 weeks, it's a wild concept, right? Every kid should get a fucking therapist. And what this therapist did, I didn't know how to speak English yet, so she would ask me questions in Spanish, and she tricked me. Because first, she would just like have me draw. And slowly over the 10 weeks, she would have me draw the scenes that I had just survived. And so then after the 10 weeks, we made this book that I still have with my drawings and her handwriting about the 9 weeks. And it's called Javier's Journey. This is before Enrique's journey, so I published it first as a 9-year-old. And that, to me, it was just drawing. But every time that I opened that book years later, it just broke my heart because I was frozen in time. And I could really see the pain that this 9-year-old and what he had gone through. But it also did something that I didn't expect. It made me think that I had processed that trauma and literally put it away under my bed and not talk about it ever again. It's like, oh, here it was. I've done that. I've talked about it. I've drawn it. As a 9-year-old kid, I am fine. I am normal. I don't need to think about that. And then it comes back. It bites you in the ass every single time.
And just to follow up on that, I mean, you moved to Marin County, as you mentioned, one of the wealthiest parts of the country. And I know your expectations were Baywatch, but that is not where you found your family. And I just want to hear, because actually, when I was reading your story, it feels like probably the most alone you felt was when you reached here. Yeah. In some ways.
Yeah.
Talk about that, living in Marin and sort of how you found your parents and all of that.
You know, a scene that I erased from the end of the book is my parents, we take a plane because it's before 9/11, so you can fly with like a US passport, a Salvadoran passport. And so we take a plane and we land and we cross the Golden Gate. And then it's beautiful Marin County. If you haven't been there, it's kind of like Aspen. and then we're on the 101, and there are these houses on the hills. I'm like, oh, fuck yeah, that's what we're doing. And then we take an exit, and then it's just what I now know to be apartment building after apartment building, and no trees. The hills are all green. There are rarely any trees. And then we go and park in this concrete asphalt place, and we park there, and we walk towards apartment number 2, and my parents opened the door, and my dad still breaks down when he remembers this, And what I tell my dad is, oh, where's the home? Where are we going? And my dad just cries. He's a crier. He's a Pisces. And he's like breaks down, and they live in a 2-bedroom apartment that they rent the living room to a family. They rent one of the rooms to 2 men. And so my world in El Salvador was huge, was expansive. I could just like run everywhere. We had toucans in the backyard. We have cornfields. And then in San Rafael, California, my whole world is crunched. Like I don't have space anymore. My parents don't even let me go to the park because the park is dangerous. And that didn't compute. It didn't make sense.
I think, we know that the headlines are filled with images, as we already discussed, of our border. Jamie, you tweeted a picture, which was a juxtaposition of the attention that the recent submarine got versus a migrant boat that sank off the coast of Greece.
Yeah, that was upsetting. It was to see one, all loss of life, tragic.
Yeah.
It's not what this is about, but it was just so much attention was on, and perhaps it's because of the very horrific way that we envisioned them perishing. So much attention on them, but these other people also perished equally horrifically and in a greater scale. And that's just that day. Something's coming up next month again and again and again. And we are so numb to that. 5 deaths is tragic. 500 deaths, it's a statistic. And it's heartbreaking and, to be fair, a little enraging. My wife is like, okay, don't go to Aspen and just burn the place down.
Wait, by the way, his wife is sitting and I just recognized her over here. She's taping it, so we have proof if he does.
Because she knows I'm a compassionate person, but there's a fire in there that's just like angered for justice. And it was the Titanic, which made me, this is ancillary to that. Does anyone know that there were Chinese people on the Titanic? There were 8 Chinese people on the Titanic. 6 of them survived. And when they were all put on the Carpathia, which took the survivors to New York, they were taken and deported. Everyone else was, in the news and interviewed, and they were kicked out of this country. So that was in the back of my mind as I'm watching all of this as well.
So I think it would be so helpful to when you have that rage and you read these headlines and you see, Javier, as you beautifully put, these stories sort of reduced to flatness that does not express your true life. How do you take that rage and create what you do? Both of you, either of you.
I guess I believe in the concept of the power of positive anger. There's a difference between anger and rage. Rage is out of control. Anger is, I'm going to use this as fuel to try to affect change. Not for me, but for all the other people like me that come along down the road. And it becomes this responsibility that you have. And some people, we're still processing our own stuff, and that's a lot to expect. But it's there, and I think that's how I view it.
Javier?
I struggle with that. I'm very angry. I'm a very angry individual still. And I think so many things had to happen. And reading Haruki Murakami's running book, I highly recommend it, in which he says the process of writing prose is kind of like running a marathon. And for me, that makes a lot of sense. And I think writing very dramatic passages makes you angry, and you have to take that energy and put it elsewhere. And for me, exercising is that thing, one of the many things in which I do that. It has to be physical. Before I was a writer, I wanted to be a soccer player, and I was a pretty good soccer player. because in the soccer field, you can tackle the fuck out of you. and as an undocumented kid, I enjoyed it, you know. And so that is the type of like aggression, like aggression, that needs to occur, and that I think is healthy, and it's still a practice that I carry on with me, and I think I would have to carry on with me for the rest of my life, because the anger doesn't go anywhere, because a lot of things don't change. A lot of things have gotten worse, you know? And so you must have an outlet. Like, I think everybody needs to really analyze what that outlet is and to cherish it, because it's necessary.
I want to turn to you all because, look, I mean, this is the best class. Okay, great. So, yes. And please say your name, too. Sorry, that was fast.
Hello, my name is Aymen Nunez. I'm with the Basil Scholars Program. I'm an educator in the Rio Grande Valley, which is a border area to Mexico. And I work with immigrant students year in and out in the college counseling arena. And so my biggest question to you as, and just hearing your stories is, what do you hope to see from the adults in the school building for our students who do come in as undocumented or migrant students?
Javier.
For them to be honest. A lot of individuals in my life, they think that by lying about the realities that these kids are facing is gonna make things better. But just telling it how it is, you're gonna have, like, if you're 17 and you got to this country, it's gonna be very difficult for you to graduate and then to figure out life after graduation. Just like saying that is actually doing a better service than lying to that kid and be like, oh, everything's gonna be okay. Some things aren't. And the individuals that actually got to me when I was very angry were the people that knew not to lie. And so that's, I think, what adults should do to kids. Just don't lie to them.
Hi there. My name is Chip Edens. I'm an Episcopal priest in Charlotte, North Carolina, and our church is very supportive of the influx of families that are coming to Charlotte. I'm listening to you talk about trauma, and I'm also struck by the need for sort of cultural competency with therapists. And I wonder if you could sort of speak to that and what that looks like, and how we can, how we can make sure that's happening.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question.
That's a great fucking question. Cultural competency. That's I want to be honest. A lot of people think that I just met one therapist and changed my life. No, I've been in therapy since I was in 7th grade. I've had, I think, the count is 12, 13 therapists over my life. Only 2 of them looked like me. The rest were white. Only one of them is also an immigrant herself, and it's the one that I'm with now. I think for some people, and I'm not saying, but for me, that needed to happen. I needed to see myself reflected in a therapist in order for me to not lie to them, because lying has also been a coping mechanism for me and for a lot of immigrants, because we learn to lie in order to survive. We learn to lie about our nationalities on the way up here. We learn to lie about our legal status in order to survive. And so lying comes easy. And I knew that Wendy Carolina Franco, you can Google her, she's amazing. Not taking any patients. But, she came here when she was 4 from the Dominican Republic, and she struggled. And she's also not a traditional therapist, in which no other therapist had told me about their lives, and she's okay with that. And again, talking about the honesty, she's just honest about the things that she has survived and hasn't. And the moment that she broke that wall, I was like, oh shit, this is gonna work. I love this person. And now we just had a session of like, now I'm like scared. Well, are you gonna retire, Wendy? Like, what's gonna happen? Like, I'm not fucking going anywhere. So yeah, you know, it's important. It's important to see yourself represented in all aspects of life.
Yeah.
You know, as Salvadorans, we have an astronaut now. I hope there are therapists, there are teachers, there are writers now. You know, we have TV shows. All those things are important. And I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
Oh, in Seattle, there's the Asian Mental Health Center. I belong to an organization that supports that, and it's free because there are cultural concerns that are different. This young person coming out to their parents who are German versus this young person coming out to their parents who are Japanese, it's a different experience. And having someone, therapy is about trust, and having someone that looks like you, that has the same cultural background, appreciates those struggles, there's an emotional shorthand at work that you don't have to explain. Sometimes it's just there when it's a good fit.
And can I just say, Javier was the first El Salvadorian to hit the New York Times bestseller list. So representation matters across all boards, including in literature, and both of these incredible authors are doing that. Sorry, and we have a lot. We'll get to everybody. We'll just keep it quick. Are we allowed to do that in Aspen? We can go a little over? Okay. Can we? Uh-oh, she looked worried. Okay.
This is Soktia Pai from the Community Development YMCA of Greater Long Beach. I immigrated to the US from Cambodia 10 years ago. And I work with undocumented population in Long Beach. Long Beach has one of the largest undocumented populations. And we have some Ukrainian refugees who arrived in Long Beach too. I didn't have a question. I just want to genuinely thank you for your profound, both of your profound story and compassionate wisdom. Because this country, if we are not Native American, we are all immigrants. It's still the land of immigrants. But to have your profound story and your compassionate hope and wisdom give us the compassionate hopes that this country needs to cope moving forward, navigating through all the challenges. So I want to thank you, and thank you.
You made my
Yes.
wife cry.
I know. You made his wife cry and you made me cry.
Gracias.
Hi, I'm Vicky Munoz. I'm with the Bezos Family Scholars. And like Javier, I'm Salvadorian. My story is very similar to you. I came here in 1988. I always say I came here, but my parents brought me here. I didn't ask to come.
Yeah.
And one, thank you so much. I have so many notes to take. So many things that you said that I'm like, I need to work through that. Oh my gosh, that's it. Put a big circle. Where's my highlighter? I'm a teacher. And so I want to say thank you so much for sharing your story for not just Salvadorians, but Nicaraguans and Guatemalans. We cross many borders. But I want to ask you, it's something that I haven't done yet. Have you gone back to El Salvador? And what was that process like? Because everyone tells me that you had to mentally and emotionally get ready for that too. So how?
A beautiful question.
Thank you. I didn't go in the best, like the first time that I went back was because I had to self-deport, because my visa, the green card that I have is called an Extraordinary Abilities Visa, or an Einstein visa. But because I came here the way that I did, I couldn't interview at a consulate in this country, so I had to self-deport and pretend like I hadn't lived in the United States for 20 years. I had to do like all these tests and then go not knowing whether I was gonna be granted the visa. And if I wasn't, I couldn't reapply for 10 years. So I was scared.
How old were you?
I was 28.
Yeah.
And so that was 2018, which also happened to be the year after El Salvador had the highest murder rate in the world. So a lot of things were like, what the fuck am I doing here? So it was very hard. I've gone back 5 other times. It's been 6. I realized that I didn't miss the country. It's not the country that I missed. It is my family, and it's my grandparents. And I love that now I have the agency and the ability and the privilege to go visit them twice a year, because my grandpa's still alive. He's still burning trash. He loves burning stuff. He's like a little pyro. And he's 85, and my grandma is 76. And so, there are limited times that I can visit them, and I know that, and I want to visit them as much as possible. And I don't care about anything else that's happening in my country. All I care about is them.
Okay, last question, but can we just do 3 questions really fast? I should have taken more time. Okay, quick, yes, and then we'll just do it really fast, okay? Fast.
About the power of storytelling in changing minds. My name is Frankie Miranda. I'm the president and CEO of Hispanic Federation. I want to ask you, what has been the most unexpected feedback that you have gotten from somebody that you never expected to receive feedback from?
Oh, unexpected feedback? Short answer. I went to a book event early on. There was one person there, and that person had just buried their father the previous day. And the book was about the Japanese internment. Her father was in that same internment camp, and we had a moment. And so it's not that you have to be something to everyone. And that day I was everything to someone, and that meant a lot.
Wow.
Okay, we'll be quick. I know, I'm getting in trouble. I'm never going to be asked back again.
Yeah. And for me, the short answer to that is putting caliche, which is Salvador in Spanish, on it.
Yeah.
I get thanked all the time.
Oh.
I'm Dava Shub. I run the Children's Museum in Manhattan, and so I'm just thinking about children all of the time, and your story is so powerful. I'm looking at the research biases embedded within kids as young as 3. We're looking at all of these asylum-seeking families in New York. I'm just wondering if you have shared your story with children, if you would. You mentioned Javier's journey, the sort of foundational piece of it, and I just think there's such a journey of empathy and power and agency in there that would do so much for both children who have had any sort of similar lived experience, and actually, maybe even more powerfully, for those who don't understand it but are in their classrooms and don't know why they don't speak their language or understand why they don't come to school in new clothes every day. And I just wonder if you've done that or if you would consider sharing your story.
Yeah. I haven't done the little kids. I've done 7th grade and above, I think, for the content.
Yeah.
But I would say that what I've seen works best is when recent arrivals are in their own assembly. When they're like lumped together with the regular kids, for lack of a better term, it doesn't really work because there's a lot of snickering and like kids are mean. And so this hasn't changed. US born kids are still making fun of recent arrivals, even though they look like each other. And so I would just have like an assembly just for them and an assembly for the other students. Yeah.
Okay, last question. I promise. Yes.
Is this working? Okay. Hi, my name is Yordano Slema. I am with the Bezos Scholars Program as a Bezos Scholar. I just want to say thank you so much because I am 16, turning 17 soon. I am first gen Ethiopian American and also hopefully first gen to have a college degree and go to college.
Yay!
And with that, I know a lot of first-gen kids have problems like me. I've had issues with imposter syndrome, and you've touched on that a little bit. What advice would you give to first-gen kids like me and other ones on imposter syndrome, and how would you, if we don't have access to therapy or anything like that, how do you think is the best way for us to face our issues without ignoring them?
I would say, and I say this, I visit a lot of high schools, and I say this, the things when you're young that you feel are your weaknesses are actually your superpowers when you get older. It'll give you a well of compassion that you can that you can use for good purposes and understanding other people. So I was that kid that struggled in high school, that I didn't think anybody liked me, it didn't matter. But because of that, I'm a good observer of human behavior. And so sometimes you can lean into it instead of leaning away from it, as long as, you know, it's a mental health challenge, obviously, but that's what I always recommend.
Just remind yourself, for me, what was hard was being in these rooms and thinking that my family members were going to feel bad about me entering all these rooms. And then once I got a green card, and the ones that I always go to are my grandparents. And now I have the ability to go over there and tell them all the cool things that I'm doing, and they're just happy for me. There's no animosity there that I think we internalize. And there's just remember that your ancestors are so happy for you and that you're making them proud. And just continue to make them proud. And also I would journal. Yeah. Just like journal. You don't even have to write, just draw. Drawing is usually like, how do you process things if you don't have access to mental health? Drawing and remember your ancestors because you're making them proud.